Genocide in China tops the list of global atrocities. That's based on a new U.S. human rights report. American companies related to China's Xinjiang region may have cause for concern. The U.S. says if they want to avoid that risk, they have to exit supply chains, ventures, and investments connected to the region. Freedom in Hong Kong takes another hit. This time, the city plans to unseat district councilors if they refuse to pledge allegiance to its Beijing-controlled government. The U.S. case against TikTok faces a turning point. The Biden administration moves to get appeals dismissed over the Chinese-owned video-sharing app. And one of China's neighbors is growing more concerned about Taiwan. Japan's annual defense report says tensions surrounding the island have reached crisis levels. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. The latest U.S. report on atrocities around the world is out. Genocide in China and human rights violations in Burma are at the top of the list. NTD's Miguel Moreno has more on that.
Congress made preventing atrocities like genocide, crimes against humanity, and war crimes a priority a few years ago. Secretary of State Antony Blinken underlined a difference in this year's prevention report.
This year, for the first time, the report provides direct, detailed accounts of atrocities taking place in specific countries, including Burma, Ethiopia, China, and Syria.
Burma, or Myanmar, and China were at the top of the high-risk list. The report says the U.S. is working with allies to stop the military regime from killing protesters and to have it give back power to the democratically elected government. Blinken also doubled down on their labeling the Chinese Communist Party's persecution of Uyghur Muslims a genocide and a crime against humanity. But this report is about atrocity prevention. Reporters question how change could come about in Xinjiang if the regime refuses to cooperate.
We totally regret the refusal of the Chinese government, number one, to let people in to look at what's happening in that situation. We're maintaining, as you mentioned, pressure with our international partners on China, both to let people in and to change its behavior. And it cannot be just by the United States alone. It has to be with our partners around the world.
The U.S. has punished Chinese companies, officials, and banned products linked to the human rights abuses in Xinjiang. Miguel Moreno, NTD News.
The U.S. warned companies on Tuesday about the growing risks of doing business with China's Xinjiang region, citing forced labor and human rights abuses there. The State Department said in a statement, given the severity and extent of these abuses, businesses and individuals that do not exit supply chains, ventures, and/or investments connected to Xinjiang could run a high risk of violating U.S. law. The Labor Department and the U.S. Trade Representative's Office also joined in issuing the advisory. The first advisory of this kind came out a year ago by the Trump administration. It targeted U.S. companies with supply chains in Xinjiang involved in forced labor. The new advisory strengthens the warning. It notes that companies are at risk of violating U.S. law, even when their operations are only indirectly linked to Beijing's surveillance network in Xinjiang. In Washington, D.C. today, right outside the Capitol, a group of activists protested, holding the 2022 Olympics in Beijing. Protesters tell us that allowing the Chinese Communist Party to host the Olympics only emboldens the CCP to continue with their human rights atrocities. NTD's Melina Weisskopf has more from the protest in D.C.
A number of ethnic and religious groups gathered in front of the Capitol Tuesday to express why they believe Communist China does not deserve to host the 2022 Olympics.
China is the only country that has hosted two Olympics back-to-back. They hosted the 2008 Olympics in Beijing, and now all of a sudden in 2022, they're hosting again. No one else has ever done that. So not only should they not be hosting, they should be banned, and they should be declared a transnational criminal organization, and we should be breaking off all diplomatic and economic ties with them.
Ethnic groups like Tibetans and Mongolians have had their spiritually rich cultures devastated by the Chinese regime. Other ethnic and religious groups like Uyghurs, Christians, and Falun Gong practitioners face jail time, torture, or even live organ harvesting if they don't renounce their faith. This Uyghur woman has family members in China who've been jailed and tortured for years. She tells NTD she regularly receives blackmail phone calls from CCP members, threatening her that they will continue to abuse her mother, sister, and uncle if she doesn't stop speaking out against the party's mass genocide. And one of the speakers is giving a warning to big corporations and name brands who are going along with the Olympics in Beijing, what they're calling the Genocide Games, because he says eventually they'll be ruining their brands by going along with this. He says that Olympics were founded based on brotherhood of man, which is completely contrary to the evil nature of the Chinese Communist Party.
Oh, well, the nature of it is pure evil. I would say the nature of it is something that is totally ungodly. They have tried to make a god of themselves. And look inside yourself and see what you really think, not what the political correctness thinks, things like that, but also find people who have been through persecution, who have been through torture, read about what's really happening.
An organizer of these protests says this is about people standing with upright principles and morals.
Although people may not see anything in the short term, but the long term is that these types of activities have also gained the support of folks on both sides.
Senator Mitt Romney has just called for a U.S. diplomatic boycott of the Beijing Olympics. The European Union just passed a resolution calling for such a boycott. Now Romney and these protesters hope Congress will follow their example and do the same. Melina Weiskup, NTD News.
A professional basketball player is using a recent game to speak up for Uyghurs held in China's internment camps. Prominent Uyghur activists are praising him for it. NTD's Allison Lee has that story.
Royce White once played for the Houston Rockets, but he made a name for himself because he did what the NBA didn't do, speaking up for victims of Communist China's human rights abuses. This is what he told CBS in an interview following a Big Three game last Saturday.
Free the Uyghurs, 2 million ethnic minorities in East Turkestan, China, in concentration camps. Something we got to talk about. You know I'm always going to talk about the real things.
The Chinese regime has held an estimated 1 million Uyghur Muslims and other ethnic minorities in China's Xinjiang region. White hoped to use the game as a platform to highlight the issue. He wrote on Twitter the next day, "When you know a moment like this should be going viral, but instead you get crickets from media outlets, that's when you know you're doing it the right way." The basketball player has also changed his Twitter profile photo to the Free the Uyghurs sign and pinned the post. His current league, the Big Three, also shared a picture of his interview. The World Uyghur Congress is praising him and contrasting White's actions with what the NBA did. They wrote, "Last year, the NBA apologized when its general manager, Daryl Morey, voiced support for protests in Hong Kong. Thank you. We need more athletes like Royce White." Back in 2019, the NBA apologized to China for making what they called inappropriate remarks. That's after the general manager of Houston Rockets tweeted a photo that says, "Fight for freedom, stand with Hong Kong." The NBA has since faced intense backlash for their stance on China. Allison Lee, NTD News.
The U.S. government's case against the Chinese-owned video sharing app TikTok is facing a turning point. On Monday, the Biden administration asked 2 federal courts to dismiss appeals from the Justice Department. That's after the DOJ targeted earlier rulings barring a Trump-era ban on new TikTok downloads. President Biden withdrew Trump's executive orders to ban Chinese apps, including TikTok, last month. Instead, Biden ordered a new review of security concerns linked to the mobile apps and directed the Commerce Department to monitor them. The Commerce Department formally withdrew its ban on new TikTok and Messenger app WeChat downloads late last month. The Biden administration is now in talks with a lawyer on behalf of WeChat users about next steps in the appeal. They'll notify the court of their decision in about 2 weeks. During Trump's presidency, the Commerce Department had also sought to place restrictions on WeChat and TikTok's use in the U.S., but the courts blocked those restrictions from taking effect. President Biden is planning to send a message to U.S. companies in Hong Kong that it may no longer be safe to do business there. The Financial Times reported the details, citing government sources. The Communist Party recently passed a new law giving itself the right to impose sanctions on any person or entity who complies with foreign sanctions against China. At the same time, foreign companies in Hong Kong could have their assets taken or face other penalties by the regime. The report says if Biden moves ahead with the message, it will be the first time the U.S. has issued a business advisory about Hong Kong. American firms have a heavy presence in the city. It hosts the regional headquarters of over 280 American businesses and is home to more than 1,000 members of the American Chamber of Commerce. The White House is also considering allowing Hong Kong citizens to stay in the U.S. after their visas expire. That's if they'll face political persecution if they go back. Hong Kong's democracy is further crumbling under pressure from Beijing. The city's district councilors are now being forced to pledge allegiance to the local government controlled by Beijing, or else they will be unseated. Many are saying they can take it no more. NTD's Penny Zhou has more.
Some 200 Hong Kong district councilors are quitting their jobs. That's because they support the city's pro-democracy movement. Yet they are required to swear oath of allegiance to the city's government, which many see as a puppet controlled by Beijing's Communist Party. Hong Kong media report that district councilors are forced into taking the oath, or else they get disqualified, kicked off the council, and made to give back their wages.
The threats that the government is posing on the district councillors is actually that they will chase back your money and you can go bankrupt because of that, because you have spent all those money on the community. That is a risk that people don't want to take.
The pro-democracy camp won a landslide victory in the city's 2019 election and secured over 80% of the nearly 500 seats. These councillors take care of city-level issues.
It is clearly shown that Hong Kong people are in support for the pro-democracy camp. That is no doubt.
Some say the mass resignation could cripple the district council's operation. Questioned about that possibility, the city's chief executive responded,
"That factor is not to be considered by us because we have to implement the law. Should there be any outcome, any consequences, we will deal with them."
The resignations may also result in the pro-Beijing camp taking back control of the council. Earlier this year, Beijing revised Hong Kong's election system and now mandates that only those considered patriots by the Chinese regime's definition can rule Hong Kong.
After the national security law is passed, everybody knows the risk of being in politics is much higher, that you may be subjected to arrest and prosecution that you have never imagined before.
Penny Zhou, NTD News.
Coming up, one of China's neighboring countries is growing more concerned about Taiwan. Japan's annual Defense Ministry report says tensions surrounding Taiwan have reached crisis levels. More on that after the break.
Don't let YouTube decide what information you get. That's your choice. YouTube is deleting our videos and cuts you off from a source of honest reporting. Make sure you don't lose access to NTD's news content, and take a quick moment to subscribe to our newsletter so no matter what happens here, you'll keep your access to a trustworthy news source.
Tensions surrounding Taiwan have reached crisis levels. This says Japan's annual Defense Ministry report. They released it on Tuesday amid Beijing's intensifying military presence in the region. Japan is becoming more worried about Taiwan's security implications in regards to its own safety. Japan's Deputy Prime Minister previously said that if Taiwan falls into the hands of the CCP, Japan's southern islands could be next. The report says stabilizing the Taiwan situation is important for Japan's national security. It adds Japan needs to pay close attention with a sense of crisis more than ever before. The defense report also warns that China's increased military presence have become a matter of grave concern to the region, including Japan. A top Japanese official pointed out that Chinese vessels have been stationed very close to Japan's territorial waters for nearly 5 months now. He called it an extremely grave situation. On Tuesday, the Chinese Foreign Ministry rejected Japan's concerns. They say that China's military activities are normal and that Japan is exaggerating what they call the Chinese threat. Discussions on whether Beijing will invade Taiwan has reached a critical point. A military expert says if Taiwan falls into the hands of the CCP, the U.S. and other democracies around the world will have to face decades of wars with China.
Why is the Chinese regime so interested in the idea of taking over Taiwan? Host of NTD's Talking Points, David Zhang, interviews senior military expert Rick Fisher from the International Assessment and Strategy Center to get an insight into the question. Fisher suggests that the reason maybe annexing Taiwan is vital to Beijing's plot towards global dominance.
How necessary is it that the U.S. ensures Taiwan is free from China for as long as they can?
In order to impose global strategic hegemony, the Chinese Communist Party must control Taiwan. Without control of Taiwan, the overall goal of the Chinese Communist Party cannot be achieved. If Taiwan falls, then the United States, Japan, and even the European democracies will be looking at decades of wars with China.
Fisher says Taiwan is militarily important to the CCP. If Beijing has control over Taiwan, the island's 6 major airports could allow China to mobilize a 5 million-man army within a month. And he adds that after taking Taiwan, Beijing will impose control over the South China Sea, then Japan's southern islands. He says the CCP won't stop until it achieves global hegemony. The Chinese regime's People's Liberation Army, or PLA, has been making preparations for an assault on Taiwan for decades. It's now ready to invade, but with a caveat.
The PLA has been preparing for an invasion for the last 20 years and is now reaching the point where if Xi Jinping wanted to invade Taiwan, he probably could, provided that he was ready to accept massive casualties.
But the good news is there is a way to prevent Beijing from ever attacking Taiwan.
Always make Xi Jinping consider that he cannot win. As long as he knows he cannot win, he's not going to try to start a war. If Xi Jinping, for example, knew that the 1,000 ships that he would have to mobilize in order to bring troops and tanks and equipment to Taiwan, if half of those ships could be sunk, then he's not likely to consider that he will start an invasion. So he will be deterred. But today,
the question now facing the U.S. is whether the country is providing Taiwan with enough military resources to deter Beijing.
So do we expect President Biden now to continue the trend of these more powerful arms to sales to Taiwan?
Yes, we do. The Biden administration has not disavowed or said that it would discontinue any of the arms sales made by the Trump administration. And really, the challenge for the Biden administration is to do even better than the record of the Trump administration if peace is to be maintained. If the PLA is to be deterred, then the Biden administration must consider selling even longer-range missiles, longer-range anti-aircraft missiles, and longer-range attack missiles that can be launched from aircraft.
Fisher says the debate on whether Beijing will invade Taiwan has reached a critical point, and it is likely to be a topic of discussion for both U.S. officials and democracies around the world for years to come.
TikTok's parent company ByteDance is not planning a public listing anytime soon. The Wall Street Journal reported on the decision Monday, quoting an insider that says such plans have been shelved indefinitely. The Beijing-based company had eyed a stock market listing in the U.S. or Hong Kong earlier this year. But after a meeting with Chinese officials, the founder of the company decided to halt such plans. Chinese officials reportedly asked the firm to address data security risks. They say that's to prevent ByteDance's data from falling into foreign hands. Beijing has been getting tougher on tech firms with a sweeping anti-monopoly crackdown recently. But Chinese officials seem to have other reasons for the crackdown. Chinese state-owned media Global Times recently said that no internet giant is allowed to have more data about the Chinese people than the country does. This year, Chinese authorities have publicly called out ByteDance for various infractions. The founder of the company resigned as chief executive in May. He is among a number of tech leaders who have stepped down as Beijing increases pressure on the sector. ByteDance isn't the first Chinese firm to cancel its initial public offering or IPO plans amid the crackdown. But it may be able to avoid the fate Chinese ride-hailing giant Didi faced recently. Didi pressed ahead with a U.S. listing despite similar warnings from Chinese officials, and it raised over $4 billion in late June. Now it's the subject of an investigation by Chinese cybersecurity authorities. They ordered app stores to remove Didi's apps. Beijing's crackdown also targeted Jack Ma's Alibaba and online delivery company Meituan. On Tuesday, Beijing said it would tighten oversight of Chinese listings outside of China. Chinese regulators are drafting new rules. They could require listed companies to seek regulatory approval before selling their shares, and unlisted companies may face strict scrutiny to list overseas. In the past, Chinese firms usually didn't need permission to list overseas. A Filipino fisherman has often braved the storms that spring up in the South China Sea, but these days he has a greater fear, seeing a Chinese Coast Guard vessel on the horizon. Gloria Cao reports.
Filipino fishermen are facing off with China's government off the coast of the Philippines in the South China Sea. It's one of the most hotly contested bodies of water in the world, rich in natural resources and home to a valuable trade route. So who has sovereignty over these waters? China claims much of the sea as its own, including this stretch of water in the Philippines' exclusive economic zone, extending 200 nautical miles from its coast. 5 years ago, an international court ruling in The Hague ruled in favor of the Philippines. But China rejected the verdict and stands by its claims to territory marked by a so-called 9-dash line. Alongside the Philippines, the 9-dash line is also contested by Brunei, Malaysia, Taiwan, and Vietnam. But China has shown no signs of backing down and continues to make military incursions. The situation is leaving fishermen such as Randy Magoo fearful for their livelihoods.
We get scared. Sometimes we get chased by rubber boats and are driven far away. Many others who have been harassed have also been shot at by water cannons.
They used to catch 4 to 5 tons of fish in less than a week. Now, if they're lucky, maybe just a few buckets. Magoo says China has only gotten more aggressive, sending more of its boats to the area.
The problem here is that in our own fishing territory, we are the ones who are pushed away. We feel that it's as if we are the thieves in our own area because the Chinese Coast Guard doesn't allow us here.
70% of Filipinos want their government to assert its claims, according to an opinion poll last year. Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte made it a campaign issue in 2016. But the firebrand leader has changed his tune since being elected. Relations with China are now a centerpiece of his foreign policy, and he's called it useless to challenge their vast neighbor. After some of his cabinet stepped up their rhetoric early this year, Duterte barred them from speaking out. The fishermen had hoped to secure their grounds after the 2016 ruling, but without enforcement, they see little hope for change.
We did win, but the problem is that the government is not doing anything about it. Since we won, they should be the ones giving us protection. Our own Navy, just like Sir Chris said, our own Navy and Coast Guard should be there, and not the Coast Guard of China.
Neither the Philippine Defense Ministry nor Chinese Foreign Ministry responded to a request for comment.
And that's all for today's China in Focus. But before you go, be sure to check out our latest special report. During the Cold War, nuclear arms were at the heart of the U.S.-Soviet Union race.
Just by being there, these weapons deter others from aggression and thereby serve the cause of peace.
Today, the struggle between democracy and communism continues, but the focus has switched from nuclear arms to something much smaller, microchips.
It has dramatically enhanced the Chinese Communist Party's military capabilities, and it is now enough a threat for the United States.
Containing Beijing's rise in the chip industry,
it's like pulling out Beijing's sharpest teeth.
But with U.S. and China deeply intertwined.
It's hard to hurt China without hurting ourselves.
In part 2 of the special report, risks that could make America vulnerable and what we are doing to fix them. In part 2 of this special report, we talk about risks that could make America vulnerable and what we are doing to fix them. Be sure to check it out on Epoch TV. China in Focus is partnering with the platform. That's where you can watch our exclusive content every Friday night. To subscribe, click epochtv.com/ChinaInFocus. Thanks for watching and see you tomorrow.